Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from and whatever time it is. We're happy to have you for our first Kneat Insights webinar of 2024. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming back. If this is not your first webinar, I'll begin in just a couple minutes. We wanted to get the room open so people could join and make sure that they are connected and hearing everything before we officially begin. So thank you for joining early. We'll give it just a moment before we get started here. All right, so we are at the top of the hour, so I'll go ahead and introduce some of our housekeeping slides here. We encourage you to reach out now and connect with your other members of the validation community using the Q&A and live chat on your audience console. So you'll see the questions module on your console there, just like you're seeing it on my screen now. There's also a chat function, so you can chat and type in messages with your audience members here. We'll be watching them, and you can respond and chat with each other about your findings, your opinions on the webinar as it continues. Your questions in the questions module, we'll gather those questions and we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation and answer as many as possible. If we don't get to all of them, we'll reach out with some answers to you as well and make sure that we do cover them. If you experience any tech issues, try refreshing your browser. If you're still having difficulties, throw a comment in the chat and our tech crew will be there to help. We want this to be an informative webinar for you, so get involved and ask all of your burning questions in the chat. Of course, if you have any questions, any feedback, anything afterwards, you want to hear more about Kneat or more of what we have to say, please contact us at info@kneat.com. That's info@kneat.com. And of course, follow us on social media, on X and on LinkedIn. We are Kneat Solutions, and there you will see all of our upcoming events, in person or virtual, and any news that we have about Kneat GX. I'll stop on our copyright and disclaimer side briefly, updated for 2024. And we'll talk about our agenda. So I'm joined today by Darren Geaney, a process engineer from Kneat, and very happy to have him on. First, today I'm going to talk a little bit about Kneat. Oh, and I guess I should reintroduce myself. I'm James Carey, the digital events manager here at Kneat, and I'll be moderating our presentation today. So I'll talk a little bit about Kneat, and then I'll pass off to Darren to talk about what you need to know about CSA, those common pain points, traditional validation approaches, CSA guidance, benefits, and intended use, critical thinking, assessing and selecting a supplier, and leveraging the customer activities, as well as risk-based validation. And again, at the end of the presentation, we'll come back to read all of your burning questions. So feel free to submit those questions at any time throughout the presentation. Oh, my slides are going back here, it seems. And just another little overview of the presentation. Just some points about what you'll learn today and what you can expect to hear. I hope you've all got your coffee and you're ready to jump in, because we are talking about CSV and CSA. Whatever brings you to our virtual table today, we're glad you're here. We're going to learn some things, have a great discussion, and explore some solutions. And it's going to be a great session. So first, I want to get us kicked off with a little bit of interactivity, a little bit of engagement, and ask you, our audience, a poll. So I'm going to launch that poll. You'll see it come up on your screen. Tell us, where are you in your journey to digitalization when it comes to your validation? Are you just starting today with this webinar? You're getting some ideas. Are you still in those early initial discovery phases? You've done some preparation work already and you're getting discussions done, but you haven't launched yet. Are you about to launch your first digital validation project? Do you have some projects delivered digitally and you're considering how best to scale? Or do you have multiple projects going on across sites being validated digitally? This is really just a temperature gauge of our audience to see where you are all at today. I'll give us another few seconds here. And wow, it looks like we are really across the board. About 40% of people have multiple projects going. 30% have some projects, but they're considering how to scale. And then we have 15% in initial discovery. So we really are across the board. And then 10% each in about to launch and starting today. So really running the gamut as far as experience here. And that's what we love to see. These webinars are Kneat insights are for anyone, not just current customers, not just prospect customers, but anyone who wants to learn and share their discoveries in the digital validation industry. So that's great. Thank you for participating in that poll. I'm going to go ahead and close it here, and we'll get on with the presentation. So a little bit, oh wow, okay. PowerPoint's really giving me trouble this morning. All right, a little bit about Kneat itself as a company. Kneat is a publicly traded software as a service company located in Ireland. Our top product is Kneat GX. Like I said, it is one platform that works for any work process for digitally validating your projects. It's a purpose-built, Part 11, Annex 11 compliant software as a service platform. And what it does for you is it eliminates 100% of paper from the validation lifecycle. Whatever that validation is for your projects, for your products, we eliminate the entire paper-based validation process and make it all digital. Our solution is proven to reduce cycle times, proven to reduce skilled labor hours, and proven to reduce validation costs. Proven to increase right first time and speed to market. And that is simply because it's easy to use, easy to train, easy to scale, audit ready anytime, and automatically enforces data integrity. It is a paperless test execution, including on-site with smart devices. So it is one platform that can be accessed from any smart device as long as you have an internet connection anywhere that you need it to be. So there's no more lugging around binders full of paper, no more searching through warehouses of years and years of data to find the right validation you need. It is a digital platform that anyone can log into with your permission and with their access. Mark their validations, mark everything, and then store all of those validations, all of that data securely, digitally, to be searched through at any time that you need it to be. So that's our product. About the company itself, like I mentioned, we're a global organization with operations across the world, headquartered in Ireland, but I'm coming to you from the US. Darren is coming from Ireland today. We also have some of our wonderful staff in France, Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, and Canada. Kneat is a publicly listed company on the Toronto Stock Exchange and thus held to a high governance of standards. And we don't just tout that, we show that because 8 of the top 10 life science companies, and that includes 3 of the 4 COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers, use Kneat in their validation processes. We are the platform of choice for 8 of the top 10 life science companies. But not just them. We've got 40,000 plus, and that plus is very important because we're always growing, 40,000 plus users in the Kneat software platform all over the world. 50 plus global partners that you'll hear from in some of our webinars. And all of our development is done in-house. We do not outsource anything. All of our developers are Kneat employees. And that is to maintain not only maximum quality of the software, but maximum security. Security is a huge point to us. We have those ISO certifications listed there on the screen and maintain them zealously. So Kneat GX itself, like I mentioned, is a software as a service platform for validation lifecycle management that digitalizes validation from end to end, enabling regulated companies to make validation easier, faster, and smarter. So that is about Kneat as a company, Kneat GX as a platform, and that's all we need to hear about that. So now I'll pass off to Darren Geaney to talk about CSA and leveraging customer activities. So Darren, thank you so much for joining us. I am finally done talking. Over to you.
That's great, James. Thanks very much. Again, I just reiterate what James said. Thanks to everyone for coming along to this webinar. It's great to see that so many people are interested in CSA and the use of CSA in specifically in leveraging customer documentation, which I think personally we should have been doing years ago, but you know, the FDA and etc. has finally come on board with that level of thinking. So What we'll do here, guys, we'll just quickly go through just what computer software assurance is and how it differs a little bit from CSV, right? So there's kind of 5 things really you need to know about computer software assurance, right? So firstly, let's read through the text. So computer software assurance comes from a multi-year collaboration between FDA and industry, and that's highly important. It wasn't just the FDA came down and said, you shall do this. It was a collaboration between the FDA and industry. I kind of think of it as the FDA being the sheriff and industry being the poachers. But look, let's work together in this case to make sure that it works together. So it identifies common pain points that existed in the current CSV approach, right? So the current CSV approach pain points, we'll go into the next slide, but I think we all know them. If we've been involved in any form of CSV, we know the parts that can cause us most problems. So the FDA's current thinking using the computer software assurance approach puts patient safety and product quality at the heart of the risk assessment process. So what they're basically saying by this, guys, is that what they want you to do, instead of taking the traditional CSV approach, which is we validate and test everything to the same level, let's look at the features, functions, or operations of the software that can most affect patient safety and product quality, and the complex operations that require maybe calculations or interactions between system A and system B. Let's concentrate on those, right? So there's really 5 kind of things that we need to know, right, about CSA. That the risk is based on the impact of patient safety and product quality measured against requirement complexity. So let's look at how risky that particular function or operation is to product quality and patient safety, and how complex it is. Let's test that more than rather just doing the same approach for something like a login screen versus something that could cause death to a patient during its operation or during the manufacture of a particular product. Okay, so item number 2, it calls for the least burdensome documentation approach. We've all seen the FDA guidance on software validation. It always said for years, we should use the least burdensome approach. I think we all know that soon became a very burdensome approach. From personal experience in the past as a software quality engineer and a software validation engineer, as soon as somebody proposed a piece of software for the company, the next question would be, is how much is it going to cost to validate it? Sometimes it was the same amount of money, which didn't really make any sense. So again, it calls for the least burdensome documentation approach. And we'll talk a little about that in a second. So it can reduce paperwork by 80% with unscripted and ad hoc testing, right? I'll briefly go through what unscripted and ad hoc testing is later on. But basically what we're talking about here is that if we look at the traditional CSV approach, it's called scripted testing. It's very step-by-step. I open the application, I log in, I do these certain steps. What's my expected result? That's kind of scripted testing, okay? That's traditional CSV approach. CSA has gone with a new thinking of unscripted and ad hoc testing for, say, medium risk and low risk features, functions, or operations that the system performs. Now, you'll need to assess the system to define what those are, but once you go in, it's a far less rigorous approach to testing. No, it is tested, but at the appropriate level, shall we say, based on the risk to the patient and the product quality. So item number 4, it results in less issues encountered in production. I think we've all been in a scenario whereby somebody's fully validated a particular system. As soon as it goes into production, 2 weeks later, there's a problem with a particularly complex operation or a feature that could affect patient quality. The production line is down, production is down for a period of days. Again, we're causing problems here. So CSA should result in less issues encountered in production because you're concentrating more of your testing, your validation effort on the complex issues and the complex features that actually are present in the software. And the last one I think is very, very important. It's supported by the FDA and the ISPE. Again, industry and the FDA got together and said, okay, guys, what's causing you problems with CSV? Because people aren't validating software as much as we thought. So again, it's supported by both the FDA and the ISPE, which is great because we're both kind of thinking on the same lines now. Now, one last caveat to this slide is just if you're going to take one thing away from this, please take this. It's the FDA are not changing their regulations, right? It's merely providing a new method to ensure you stay compliant with those regulations, right? So that's what CSA does. No regs are changing. It's just a faster, better way to implement and be consistent with those regulations. Okay, so we go on to the next slide, please. So the next slide there, please, James. Perfect. So just quickly go through, guys, the common computer system validation pain points, right? And look, we've all been there. Okay, the first one, right? Let's think about what CSV is at the moment, right? Traditional CSV. It basically says, I'm doing something because my process, My SOP, my software development life cycles, says I have to. Does it make any sense? It doesn't matter. It's because I have to. And what does that lead to? It generates substantial amounts of documentation. We have huge amounts of documentation that we generate, right? It's doing things for the auditor without thinking, which is criminal, really. Like the auditor expects us to have this testing done on this particular system. Okay, has it been done by the supplier? Yes, but I'm going to do it again because our software development lifecycle says I need to do this testing. You know, it can lead to that. Okay, test script pages that run into several pages. Again, let's think about traditional CSV, which is scripted testing, right? I could have a 10-page test script to verify the login details on a particular system. I could have a 10-page test script to test the most complex part of that particular piece of software that could impact the product quality and patient safety. Am I putting my resources into the right area there? Maybe not. You know, I don't think I am really. Again, based on the risk. So 4, it takes too long to validate, right? So time taken to perform dry runs as opposed to testing the system, for example. I'm a trained auditor as well, and I'm a former software validation engineer and a software quality engineer. We reran documents and test scripts again and again and again to make sure that we had a clean run to present to the auditor. Right? You know, we had two deviations or issues when we ran the testing. Six weeks previous, when we dry ran this, we had 20. But we updated the protocol. We updated all the sentences in the test so that it would run correctly. So again, we're doing all these dry runs for no reason. And the last one there, number 5, is addressing test script errors and associated time and cost impacts. You know, like, let's go back to the example of the login screen. I could have 10 pages to test that. I mean, could I do it shorter? Could I summarize the testing before I actually do it? Could I summarize it in a test script? Yeah, I can. So that's what the common CSV pain points, right? And that's what the FDA and industry realized when they were looking at it, that these are common pain points that we shouldn't be coming across when we're validating software, right? So I can go to the next slide, please. So again, just to keep on going with this, the traditional validation approach is we're implementing a software system to drive efficiency and quality improvements. That's why we always bring in software. We're trying to improve things as we go along, right? So let's look at what we have here, right? So we've got, look at the triangle here. We're mostly generating documentation. That's where we're spending most of our time, right? We're then spending second amount of our time doing testing activities, followed by the assurance needs, followed by critical thinking, right? So we're not really thinking about how we validate this particular system. Can we leverage anything our supplier has done? Can we leverage anything that's done downstream of this particular process that we're trying to that we're actually validating, or even upstream? You know, are we looking at anything else? And the answer is no. We're just looking at this piece of software in isolation, looking at our software development life cycles, and say this is what we do. And you can see here on the text to the left, guys, it says multiple test cases written for each requirement. Yeah, we've all done that. Multiple dry runs. I've done that in the past myself. Again, we're just making sure something is nice for the auditor. Are we concentrating on the activities that require more rigor? No, we're not. We're just doing it because we have to. Where protocol generation errors are corrected. Typos, guys, we've all seen typos, and we spend so much time updating typos, right? Again, we shouldn't be, because we're correcting a typo because the text has been put in there in the first place. Why has the text been put in there? Because we test everything the same. And then we end up with one formal test execution, and surprise, surprise, we have 0 defects. You know, aren't we all very good when we present it to the auditor, right? So if we look at the text on the left, it's critical thinking is not really applied, and I'll talk about critical thinking later on. Okay, so we're not really thinking where should I concentrate my testing? Can I leverage something from the vendor? Can I leverage downstream processes, for example? And the second bullet point then is every feature is tested the same. I go back to my 10 pages for my login screen versus my very, very complex feature. I test it the same way, which leads to huge amounts of documentation and testing activities. And it's a very arduous documentation approach. I mean, you could spend more time generating the documentation than actually doing the testing activities and doing the verification, which easily happens, right? So the industry and the FDA got together and they looked at this, said, look, there has to be a better way to do this, because this is a very slow, ponderous, not really thinking approach, right? So if we go on to the next slide, please. So say, right, let's look at this, and let's look at the computer software assurance, right? So we're going to look at the benefits of computer software assurance. So essentially what we're talking about here, guys, is that you can see here the first bullet point here. We're going to leverage the supplier. What has the supplier done for us? So I need a piece of software. If I don't develop it in-house, or even if I do develop it in-house, what has the supplier done that I can leverage to stand over at the end and say this particular piece of software is validated. You know, have I got all my design? Have they got all the design documentation? Have they done internal testing on the software before they send it to me? They will. I mean, nobody's going to create software and just send it into a pharmaceutical company and say, there we go, guys, it's working fine. Come back to us if you have a problem. It's always going to be valid. So leveraging the supplier, right, is a huge part of this, and this is what this webinar is about. So it also asks for risk-based evaluation. Again, what's the particular software for? What's the intended use of this software? Okay, is this particular piece of software only part of the quality management system? Like, is it an eCAPA system? Is it a learning management system? Is it a document management system? Okay, none of that is going to touch the product, and none of that is going to touch the patient. So, right, it's a less risky piece of software in terms of that. So I can take a different testing approach rather than something that, say, controls the mixing rate or the mixing rate in the tank, or responds and records the temperature in the tank, for example. That could affect the product. It then leads to streamlined testing, which is your traditional scripted testing for high-risk areas, and then your ad hoc and your scripted testing, which I'll go into later on, which is used for medium to low risk features, functions, or operations that are part of the system, right? So again, I'm looking at the risky parts and going, right, I'm going to use traditional CSV. I'm going to point most of my testing effort on that, because that's the risky part. The other stuff I'm going to test, but not to the same level of rigor. Okay, and the last bullet point here that on the left is based on the intended use of the computerized system, risk should dictate the process of determining the system validation approach, and this risk determined should establish a commensurate level of validation effort. In other words, it kind of sums up what I said in the first 3 bullet points. I'm looking at the risk that this particular piece of software has on the product quality and patient, and looking at what I need to do with it based on how risky it is. And even then, that particular piece of software can be broken down into high, medium, and low risk features, functions, or operations, and I'll use the commensurate testing approach for that. So if we just go then to the image on the right, you can see here that we're now using critical thinking. We're spending most of our time thinking about how we should test this and the most appropriate testing that we should do on this, okay? So you can see here at the bottom, now we're doing more critical thinking. We're looking at the assurance needs. We're looking at the testing activities, and documentation is the least of our worries. We do need to create the documentation, but we're spending less time on that because we've looked at the risk, we've verified the testing activities, we've looked at the assurance needs that we need from us as the system owner and from the supplier, who we get some of the information from. We can use that then to come to the conclusion that the system is then validated. So the intent here is that it's improved quality and efficiency, and the validation effort could be reduced by as much as 30%. And really what we're doing here then is we're spending more time challenging the system. Go back to a slide or 2 back, we validate a system, we put it on the production line, 2 weeks later there's a problem. Why? We didn't spend enough time challenging the system. That's what CSA would like you to do, to challenge the system more for the complex features and those that impact patient safety and product quality. So could I go on to the next slide, please? So critical thinking, I've used this term a lot, right? Critical thinking really is based on, it's a risk, to help us take a risk-based approach to compliant GXP computerized systems, right? So critical thinking is actually talked about in GAMP, in the latest version of GAMP, right? So I'll just read through the few bullet points here and I'll kind of talk to them then, right? So critical thinking promotes informed decision-making and good judgment on where and how to apply the scale, quality, and compliance activities for computerized systems. Critical thinking should be applied to understand the implementation risks, as well as functional risks to the patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. Regulated companies need to apply critical thinking during the assessment of suppliers and be familiar with the current approaches to IT, IS solution and service. What we're essentially talking about here, guys, is that you look at basically, as I mentioned earlier, the riskier parts of your system and the ones that could impact patient safety and product quality. You look at those and you concentrate your testing there, you concentrate your documentation there, right? Also, you can see here, it does talk about the regulated companies should apply critical thinking during the assessment of suppliers, okay? We're all kind of in the same industry here. We all use very similar and sometimes the same supplier, right? Some suppliers are better than others, you know, supplier of a software system, supplier of a part, for example. We need to look at those particular suppliers, and during the audits, before we take those suppliers on board, we need to look at their quality management system. What does their quality management system do? Okay, do they create the documentation? Do they do robust testing? Have they tested everything so we can leverage the information that they've got from their testing? Okay, let's bring that into our validation approach, because remember, I'm using critical thinking here. I'm thinking, what's the most riskiest parts of this software? Are they testing it to a level that's acceptable to me? If they're not, I may need to do more testing, but if they are, I can leverage that. Okay, so that's really one part of critical thinking, and we're just getting us to use our knowledge or scientific knowledge of the process that we're going to digitize to make sure we can leverage anything that the software supplier has given to us. Okay, can you go on to the next slide, please? And again, just to continue on this, right? So critical thinking should be applied to ensure that, and again, this is taken from the GAMP, ISP GAMP guidance, right? GAMP 5. So the evaluation of the risk to quality should be assessed on scientific knowledge and ultimately linked to the protection of the patient. And the level of effort, formality, and documentation of the quality risk management process should be commensurate with the level of risk. Okay, so these two first bullet points here say basically we don't kind of make up, or we don't decide that, okay, it's Thursday, I think this particular feature or software function it was high risk on Tuesday, it's low risk on Friday because I want to get out the door at 4 o'clock and go home. No, we have to take a scientific approach based on the assessment of what we can do, right? To that level, I always think that the subject matter expert for the particular process that you're trying to digitize is going to be a hugely valuable person in this part of the team. Critical thinking should always include the subject matter experts at the very early stage of the project. Their best use is to advise the person who's going to bring in this system on where to concentrate their testing. In other words, we'll do scripted testing on these 4 or 5 operations that we're digitizing or that we're going to implement in software. Let's take that approach, okay? And it can be based on, a business risk, a patient quality risk, or a complexity of the system, right? So again, you're really getting people to think in advance of what we're going to do, right? So the last point here is, in the context of computerized systems, scientific knowledge is based upon the system specifications and the business processes being supported. So again, I have a system specification here for a very complex requirement that is a very complex operation. Okay, I'm going to do traditional testing on this line by line. Because this is a really risky part of the system. Okay, again, I want to make sure that I'm concentrating where I need it to be done, right? So that's really in relation to critical thinking and how we can actually look at that to make sure we're testing the appropriate operations to the appropriate level. Again, we're concentrating on the ones that can affect patient safety, product quality, and complexity. Okay, so the next slide, please. Thank you. So we come then to assessing and selecting a supplier. Okay, we all go out and we all go to our suppliers before we bring them on board, and we do an audit of them. We make sure that they have a quality management system. We make sure that they can deliver on time. We make sure that they keep their quality management system up to date, right? So I'll just read through these bullet points and we'll go from there. So assessing the vendor should be a risk-based approach based on the application of critical thinking to understand the risk to patient safety, quality, product quality, and data integrity. Again, let's not all treat suppliers the same, right? Okay, I'm bringing in a supplier that's going to give me a system that doesn't impact directly anything to do with the system that can affect patient safety and product quality. Okay, I might take a different approach to verifying that supplier. I might take a less rigorous approach on how I actually audit them. Like, do I need to make sure they do certain things as part of their QMS? I may not, but that's up to the company to decide. But CSA does give you that option to audit them slightly differently. So the next bullet point is, regulated companies should assess the quality and reliability of their computerized systems suppliers and service providers. That's a standard, that's a given, right? If I'm going to a supplier and they're providing me with a piece of bespoke software, in other words, a custom piece of software just for me that I'm going to use that can have an impact on the product quality or the patient safety, I'm going to make sure that I assess their quality system and reliability as well. So not just the fact that they can deliver it and that system can be validated. If there is a change and if I request a change to that particular system, or they implement a change, if it's just an off-the-shelf system that can be bought, how do they ensure that that change is made per their QMS and meets the FDA regulations, right? Again, I want to make sure that they stay within the boundaries of their QMS when they're making a change. So then you're assessing commercial reputation, right? I mentioned earlier that we're all kind of working in similar or possibly the same industries, and we talk to each other, right? Like, say for example, how did you get on with this company when they brought in this software for you? Oh, we got on really well with them. You know, the audit went very well. They gave us all the documentation that we required, so we leveraged all their functional specification document. We leveraged 70% of their testing documentation, and we tested some stuff internally ourselves because it was high risk to us, and we decided to do only 30% testing then rather than 100% of testing with CSV. Yeah, okay, we got on really well. That's your commercial reputation. And I think, being honest, going forward, a lot of suppliers are going to have to up their game to make sure that they have this documentation when requested by a company that's purchasing the software. I don't see, even though it does happen, sometimes a company needs to get a particular piece of software from a particular company. They don't have the most robust QMS in the world. It just leads you as the person who's buying this particular piece of software and who's responsible for it to do the work. Okay, but let's look at that, their commercial reputation. And again, you've ongoing vendor audits per your supplier audit schedule, and that's a standard. We just make sure that they keep doing what they're doing on a kind of a regular basis by auditing them on a regular basis, right? And the last bullet point then is regulated companies need to apply critical thinking during the assessment of suppliers and be familiar with the current approaches to ITIS service and solution. Again, how often do I go in? With some companies, I might need to go in every year because, right, they may not have the greatest reputation, or some things have gone wrong and it's not working for me now, or I'm having issues with them. Okay, instead of doing it every 2 years, I'm going to go in every year and I'm going to check them again. Okay, and then you're just using critical thinking of how often do I need to assess these suppliers and to audit them. Okay, and again, you can see here it's referred to section 8.3 of leveraging supplier input from the GAMP guidance. So if I can go on to the next slide, please. So let's CSA, right? So we talked about CSA is basically about leveraging documentation and testing, etc., that can be supplied by a vendor. What should we do? The first thing you should do is make a plan. Okay, we should always make a plan because you really need to understand what vendor documentation that you're actually going to use. So let's say, for example, you create your intended use. I'm a firm believer in being a very clear, concise intended use document that is drafted and owned by the company bringing it in. Why? Because the manufacturer is responsible for the software that comes in for its intended use. Okay, I'm always I'm a bit messianic on that. I like seeing a very clear intended use. But you might talk to your vendor and you're looking at your vendor and going to say, okay, I'm going to use your functional specifications document. I'm going to use your product risk assessment. I'm going to use all your installation and functional testing. I'm going to use the trace matrix that you generate, and I'm going to depend on those reports that you've generated to show that that system is validated. No, that's the ideal situation, right? In reality, you will use a portion of, say, for example, the installation and functional testing. You probably will leverage their reports, and you will certainly use their trace matrix. So again, you're talking to the vendor up front. You're assessing what they're going to supply to you, and you're going to make sure that it's appropriate for you in what you want to do, and more importantly, it meets your software development lifecycle requirements when taking the CSA approach. You know, don't just take what they have as working. You have to assess it. You have to look at it and decide what you want to use. And again, you document that in the plan. So I, as the purchaser of the particular software, know what I'm getting, and B, that the supplier knows what they need to give me. Okay. And then for the testing details, right, we kind of have a look then at the testing, right? So first bullet point, what are you as the owner going to test versus what the vendor has and will test for you, okay? So we can go into some examples of that in a minute, but just to summarize it, let's say, for example, they have a particularly the system has a particularly complex operation, or the system will say, for example, talk to 3 other systems. Okay, they have done testing on that, but then again, with your critical thinking hat on and your risk assessment hat on, you're looking at the testing that they did for that, and you go, do you know what? I'm going to do another bit of further testing on that, because while they've tested it internally as the vendor, I'm going to just do that little bit more testing, and I'm going to use scripted testing to make sure that I meet the requirements of my software development lifecycle. But then let's go back to the example of verifying the login page. Okay, I don't need to test that in detail. I could take their testing and just accept it because it's very straightforward and it's not particularly, doesn't affect the patient quality or patient safety or quality, product quality. So I'm just going to use their testing on that and leverage that, and I'm going to detail that in my plan. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff you need to look at, and we'll go through a few examples of that in a moment. And the last one then I think is very important is the sequence in which the testing is to take place. You know, you have your FAT, your SAT, your installation qualification, your operational qualification, who's going to do what and when. Again, this is just standard kind of validation planning, but when you're taking the CSA approach and you intend to leverage a lot of the customer documentation, these are some of the specifics that you should be thinking of and defining and agreeing on upfront with your supplier. And go to the next slide, please. So leveraging supplier activities, okay? No, I'm just referring here to the FDA draft guidance on CSA, okay? So from the computer software assurance for production and quality system, I'll just read through the bullet points, right? For example, supporting software as referenced in section VA often carries lower risks, such that the assurance effort may be generally reduced accordingly, because assurance activities used directly in production or the quality system often inherently cover the performance of supporting software assurance that this supporting software performs as intended and may be sufficiently established by leveraging validation records, software installation or software configuration, such as additional activities, scripted or unscripted testing may be unnecessary. And the second bullet point, manufacturers are responsible for determining the appropriate assurance activities for ensuring the software features, functions, or operations maintain the validated state. In a nutshell, what we're saying here, everyone, is that if we're going to leverage validation records, as we've just talked about in the previous slide, we can do that. Again, unscripted or scripted testing may be unnecessary. It really is how risky the particular piece of software is coming in. Does it affect the patient and patient safety and product quality? And again, we're dictating that using critical thinking and based on the risk assessment. And the second bullet point is, as the manufacturer, we're responsible for making sure that system stays in the validated state and is maintained to stay in the validated state. And that all comes as part of your software audits and your supplier audits as well, and making sure that they stick to the QMS that they have, and that's suitable for you. Like the last thing you want is for a software company to come in and just start putting out updates onto your system without you knowing about it. You should at least be notified. You should at least know what those changes are. You should then determine if those changes make a substantial change to any of the features or operations that can affect patient safety and product quality. And again, then make the call whether you need to deploy them or not. But that's an internal thing for your own company. But the big bullet point from here is to make sure that manufacturers are responsible to make sure it's still maintained. Okay, so we just go to the next slide, please. So again, so just to continue on with this again, and this is from the GAMP guidelines. Okay, I won't read through all these bullet points here because it's I know you can all read exactly. So what I'm going to do here, guys, just summarize this is right, but I'm going to talk to the second bullet point is planning should determine how best to use supplier documentation, including existing test documentation, to avoid wasted effort and duplication. That's essentially the essence of leveraging CSA and leveraging supplier activities, right? It actually, the FDA and the GAMP guidance are actually driving you towards that. They want you to use this. Why? Again, we go back to what the FDA said at the time, many years ago. They want you to use the least burdensome approach. Again, it became a very burdensome approach. Now they're looking to, let's leverage what's already there. You know, don't invent the wheel, right? You know, take credit for what's already been done by your supplier. If your supplier will probably test everything for you. Again, you may need to do some extra testing when you get it in yourself, and we'll go through some examples of that later. But take what's there, you know, and make sure that it's suitable for you. Again, I go back to what I said earlier. Just because the customer says they have it, you have to make sure that you're happy with it and you can defend it in the event of an audit. Or more importantly, if you need to call the supplier, they can defend it in the event of an audit. Okay, but you're leveraging what they have for you to make sure that the system is validated in a quick and timely manner. Okay, so if you go on to the next slide, please. Okay, and then just the last point here. Again, this is from section 8.3, leveraging supplier input in GAMP. Supplier activities, including testing, may be used by regulated companies as part of verification. So again, GAMP, while it's not a regulation and never will be, it's a good guideline of how you can meet the actual, how you can validate your system to meet the regulations, right? Again, I'll just go to the second point here. Supplier documentation, information, and records should be assessed for content and quality. Regulated company procedures and processes should be flexible regarding acceptable format and structures so that supplier documentation may be leveraged. Okay, little story. I worked in a company a couple of years ago. We had a quality manager who insisted that every piece of supplier documentation had to use our templates. Right. I disagree, right? The content, again, I think of documents that get to you. Let's look at the content. A template is a starting point. What does the content of that document say, right? It's called an FS, right? Or it's called a functional spec, right? The supplier calls it a functional spec. Our quality system calls it a functional requirement specification. It's a slightly different template, right? Is the content the detail in the supplier FS? Yeah, then let's use that. Let's not push someone onto a template that they're not familiar with. It'll take time, and you won't get any extra benefit from it. Let's use what they have. Okay, and again, let's be flexible. Let's design our software development lifecycle to be able to do that. Take the CSA approach, take the critical thinking methodology, and let's do that. So the last one then, guys, again, I'll just emphasize this. It's not always the case that you just accept what the vendor has is enough. If, for example, you really need a vendor product, but the vendor does not meet your SOP or SDLC requirements, you may need to perform some of the tasks yourself as you are the end user and responsible from a regulatory standpoint. It could be 3 people in this company creating this product for you, and they're your supplier. They're not great, so you might need to take on some of those approaches. But again, that's part of your plan, and your plan will have critical thinking in mind, and you'll test accordingly if they don't test for you. Okay? So can I go on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so support and maintenance, right? Yeah, so let's look at this then. So the supplier should support and maintain the system in accordance with agreed contracts. So when we're talking about this, guys, again, no different in CSV to your suppliers. I want to make sure that the supplier makes sure and maintains in accordance with agreed contracts, right? If I am using a supplier and I'm happy with their approach that they take, let's say, for example, and they say they need to send out a patch. Okay, I've audited this company. I'm happy with their QMS. They have a great reputation. Okay, I'm happy enough for them just to let them notify me of any change that's made in the software. Now, I may need to be notified a week in advance. I may need to give a yes go on it, or I may need to agree, say, for example, the downtime, for example, on that particular system, so the patch can be loaded, remotely or on site by the vendor. But I'm not going to do any extra testing because I'm happy with the vendor and they're really, really good at what they do. They have a QMS, their software development lifecycle is suitable for me and what I wanted to do. So I'm happy enough for them to do that. That might not be the case with all vendors. I worked in the past with a company that basically, when we put out a software patch for a particular issue, they would want to be notified a month in advance. They would then retest all the changes that we did before they would let us roll out the patch. So there comes into your supplier's level of knowledge, your supplier's quality management system. How do they stick to that? Their reputation, are they good people to work with? When they roll out a patch, will it work, for example? So again, that's no different to what we have now. But again, let's take the CSA approach, the critical thinking approach. Are they rolling out a patch on a system that could impact patient safety and product quality? Then we might take a different approach to that, okay? So again, some considerations for changes, updates, and patching during support and maintenance phase could be, has the software substantially changed its intended use? That's the first thing I always think about when someone tells me about patches. Have I made a change to its intended use? If it is, I'm going to think differently on letting that patch be put on the system because I might have documentation updates that I need to do internally, or the software vendor needs to be done. Have the system changes, update / patch increased or decreased the risk of a particular feature or operation of the system? Again, have they changed that? Have they now decided that, especially the supplier has decided that this feature or operation is now, we deem this to be low risk? Okay, you deem it to be low risk, but from my perspective as the manufacturer, I think it's still high risk. Okay, right, you've done unscripted or ad hoc testing. I'm still going to treat it as high risk. I'm going to, before I let you roll out this patch, I'm going to do testing internally because I want to make sure that it works, okay? And again, these are just some of the considerations. And the last one then is, so the second last one is, have the changes or updates patch introduce new functionality, and has the supplier tested those to the appropriate level? Again, sometimes features, and we all know manufacturers, Kneat essentially, we come out with new features. Super. Have we adequately tested those features to your level of need? Yeah, okay. Then we'll start using those features, or we'll investigate, start using those features. And again, has the supplier tested the changes, updated patches to the appropriate level, which is the kind of summation of the top 3 bullet points. Again, I want to make sure it's still maintained, but I'm going to take a different approach depending on the impact of the change to the system and whether that system impacts product quality or patient safety as well. So can I go on to the next slide, please? So these are just some examples, right, of, let's say, for example, a feature or a feature that's part of a system, right? So you can have here some additional custom requirements, some customer business risks, and some customer specific steps. So we just kind of talk through these, right? So let's look at this first example here, the additional custom requirements. So we have the example. A user must be able to generate all company specific deliverables. Okay, this could be satisfied by customer testing for document creation functionality. So we don't need to do anything else, okay? We've looked at their testing. That's good for us. We're going to leverage that. Okay, and let's look at the second one here. So for example, a user must be able to log in with company specific corporate credentials via single sign-on. Now, the vendor will probably test that, right? Now, we might need to test that separately in our system when it comes on site, okay? They might have a different configuration to us for single sign-on, which is fine. But we're going to test that. Now, we might test it at the site acceptance testing level as opposed to doing all the operational qualification testing to verify single sign-on works. So essentially, like, this is an example of where something that's seemingly simple that the vendor has tested and proven, but we might still need to just verify that when it comes on site, okay? So that's just 2 examples of that. And then we go to ranking for customer business risks, and we look at the example. The system must be able to log consumable usage for restricted items. Now, classified as high legal risk, okay? Again, risk is risk, okay? So it may be satisfied by vendor testing for inline execution for electronic signature functionality. So every time you use a particular restricted item, you might need to sign to say that I've used this particular item, right? Again, it may be satisfied by the vendor testing, right? No, it may not be satisfied by the vendor testing if the company itself has a procedure that requires all high-risk items to be tested internally. That's a policy thing, right? The company might say, taking the CSA approach, if we identify something as high risk, we're going to do internal testing ourselves to verify this high risk functionality. That's a policy. So you might need to do it that way. And the last one then is customer specific configuration setup. The user may only create content within the customer specific process parameters, right? Okay, again, the key thing here is customer specific process parameters. Like, this might not be satisfied by vendor testing due to the unique configuration setting combinations available during setup for a given customer. Again, you can configure the system using various parameters that you want. Let's say, for example, the feature is controlling critical quality attributes, or critical temperature values, or critical pressure parameters. Once you bring it on board and on site, you may want to test those again yourself to make sure that where you're perfectly happy with the functionality that the vendor has verified, you want to make sure it works at, say, your upper level and your lower level in terms of those values and parameters. So again, you might do more testing on that. But again, the functionality is developed or tested already by the tester. You just want to make sure that you have that extra test based on your policy to make sure it's working adequately for you. So can we go to the next slide, please? So this is just a quick diagram here, guys, of risk-based validation. I won't go through it all. You can see that it has the risk-based approach. Again, risk-based validation, you can see here, leverage supplier audits. Let's look at the supplier. Let's audit them and use the information obtained by that audit, so we can then use their testing techniques and the available documentation that they have, right? So again, you can have a choice then of unscripted or ad hoc testing. Just a few bullet points. All functionality is tested, but only high-risk functionality requires traditional scripted testing. Utilize unscripted and ad hoc techniques for low to medium risk, and unscripted testing does not equate to no documentation. And the last one then, guys, is vendor audits. And you can see here it's highlighted in bold. Leverage testing by the supplier to scale further validation effort, okay? Really, really use what they have available to you so you can leverage that. So go on to the next slide, please. So again, just a few of the main takeaways from this presentation, guys, in terms of leveraging supplier audits. Think of CSA not as the computer software assurance, but as a common sense approach, right? We really should have been doing this for quite a long time. Why do something just because we have always done it this way? CSA provides a method of ensuring you stay compliant with regulation, which encourages leveraging supplier documentation as regards to patient safety and product quality centric approach. It's not a process centric approach. So let's leverage the supplier documentation, and let's get away from thinking that it has to be in this template. We have to do it because our policy says we have to do. So the use of critical thinking and leveraging supplier input. Again, I would ask that people see the FDA guidance and the recently released GAMP 5 second edition. You get some good examples there, guys, of what you can do and some good clarifications of leveraging supplier audits. Leverage existing supplier activities and supplier data. Do not reinvent the wheel and take credit for what's already been done, okay? If it's been done, let's use it. It's valuable to us so that we don't have to do it again. It's not always that you just accept what the vendor has is enough. You need to ensure that your vendor's processes satisfies the deliverables of your quality system as defined by your CSA approach. If we go back to the slide we said earlier, guys, your company might have a policy that all high-risk features have to be tested internally. That's fine. If that's the case, we could argue with the quality manager and the quality director that we don't need to do that, but the policies can be changed. And as CSA is implemented in a company, and the further use and the more use of leveraging supplier data and leveraging supplier documentation, that I think may well change. And then you have the SME involvement when applying CSA and your critical thinking approach. I can't emphasize that enough. It's the people who are familiar with the process and the people know how the process work are very useful in helping you identify the features or operations that can affect patient safety and product quality. It really helps you in determining what you need to do and what you can test, how you can test it, and what you can also then leverage from the supplier documentation as well. Let's go back to the example I mentioned previously about, logging into the system. Okay, the supplier might have done it one way, but you have a different sort of single sign-on approach. Okay, I just need to test it. Your SME will be able to tell you, look, that's fine, the supplier has done this, but let's have a quick unscripted testing just to make sure that we can verify it correctly. That's all. So these are just some of the main takeaways, guys. And we go on to the next slide, please. So again, that's the end of the presentation, guys. I would like to thank you once again for your attention. I hope you've learned something from this. I hope that it's, probably made you think a bit differently about CSA and about leveraging customer documentation. And I hope it will help you in your future endeavors when you try to use the CSA approach and leverage your supplier documentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Darren. That was a great presentation. We have a few minutes left over for Q&A, and I know that I promised we'd get to as many as possible. We have quite a few here. I'm going to take off one right off the top that I see here, asking to get the slide presentation. That will be emailed to you in the coming days. If not tomorrow, then on Monday. We'll have a recording posted of this webinar so you can watch it again on demand, as well as a PDF of the presentations. So no worries about that. Just look out for that email. I'm going to go back up to the top here. So one of the first questions was, can you do offline testing as well? Can Kneat do offline testing? And no, that is for data security and to make sure that there are no synchronization issues, but Kneat GX requires an internet connection. It can be used from anywhere as long as you have a connection to the internet to verify your credentials, your identity, your permissions, and the data. So that is a quick one there. First question for you, Darren. Does the EU MDR also support CSA approach?
My opinion would be yes. I think that the GAMP guidance is an industry guidance. It's not region specific. So I think that I know that the FDA are the leaders on this, but I think that considering it's been detailed and talked about and documented in GAMP about leveraging supplier activities, I think it's still applicable, and I think it's applicable across. I think it's globally applicable, to be honest.
Okay. Great, excellent. Thank you for that answer. Next one up, what project roles would be proposed during the critical thinking assessment for vendor assessment or product risk assessment per CSA guidance?
The CSA guidance doesn't really, the CSA guidance, the FDA are always great in this. They tell you what they'd like to see, but they don't tell you how to do it. So I would I would look at the GAMP guidance, right? The GAMP guidance is really good for that. But from my perspective, if I was running a CSA project, I would want the SME in place. I would want somebody from quality in place. And I would want somebody with an understanding of the software and IT systems that's going to be brought in. They would be at a minimum the three that I would have involved. Because you'll get huge amounts of information from your SME, you'll get huge amounts of information from your IT specialist, and quality will be there to make sure that any company regulations and any concerns that they might have will be addressed during that critical thinking part. But it can be a much larger team, but that would be my opinion, at least those three would be required, if not more.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Thank you for that answer. Next one, what is enough for quote unquote robust testing by the vendor? Must everything be scripted, or can the vendor also apply the same risk-based principles and do unscripted and or ad hoc testing based on impact of individual functions?
Yes, I think they can, right? I mean, as the owner, as the legally responsible person for the system, right? So we bring in the system into, say, Kneat, okay, for example, right? We bring in the system into Kneat. If our supplier is following a CSA approach, then when we're doing our supplier audits, we'd look at that CSA approach and see, is that applicable, and does it match, and does it meet our CSA approach needs? So as I mentioned earlier, you don't just take what they have and say that's okay. You kind of look at what they do. But I see no issue if they describe something as a low risk and it requires, just unscripted testing or ad hoc testing. Okay, that's fine. Does it agree with my interpretation of that particular feature, function, or operation? It does. Okay, let's use that. If it doesn't, then I may internally need to test that again. But I see no issue with a supplier following the CSA approach. In fact, again, no, this is my own personal opinion. I can see more and more suppliers going down that approach because it's quicker to get their product to you as the manufacturer. It's quicker to them to go to market with their product, and then it will help you to bring your product that you're generating using this particular piece of software to get it to market quicker as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Next question. This person is curious as to where you would classify a GLP study management system in contrast to a GMP system relative to risk to patient safety and product quality.
I would look at the impact of the GLP system. Is it making a decision that can affect something on the production line? So let's say, for example, like I'm very familiar with working with spreadsheets in a laboratory environment, right? So let's say, for example, I've got a spreadsheet that I have in the lab. Okay, do I validate that spreadsheet? I think you should, and I think you would, because if that spreadsheet is making a determination whether a product can go out the door and be sent to the patient, or gets kept and held, or even discarded, I think the CSA approach can be used on that as well. But that's just my opinion. I mean, I know that in certain cases the labs won't have any impact on the product quality and patient safety, but I would look at the approach as the same in one sense. But again, that's just my opinion.
Sure. Well, we're here for your opinion, so we appreciate it. All right, next one here. What other industries should be using CSA over full validation?
Ooh, that's a biggie. No, I can only speak to myself. I've worked in the medical device and the pharmaceutical industry, so they're the ones that I look at, right? Let's look at things like aerospace. Could the aerospace industry use the same CSA approach? Could the manufacturing of motor vehicles take the same CSA approach? Like what I often think of with CSA, right, is let's say, for example, Toyota have a manufacturing facility. I've just picked Toyota at random, okay? Toyota have a series of suppliers, right? Toyota have guys and companies that supply them with the seats. They supply them with the radios. They supply them with the steering wheel and all those components, right? Okay, Toyota come in. They put all these parts together on a production line. They send the car out the door, and the door is delivered to the actual customer once it's done, okay? Like when Toyota put that car together, they don't retest the steering wheel again. They don't retest the radio works. They don't retest that the seats work. their suppliers are making sure that that system is perfect and that make sure that when they get it, it works for them. So I think areas like the motor industry might use it in the future if they're not using it already.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there are a lot of different industries that could benefit from using CSA that we don't even cover, or maybe that we don't even think to cover yet. We are 1 minute away from the top of the hour. I have a couple more slides to cover. Everyone whose questions we did not get to, I will be passing this on to our subject matter experts in Kneat and get an answer back to you, but we really appreciate you submitting those questions. I want to touch briefly on one of our digital guides, how to adapt CSA for streamlined computer system validation. This is just one of many ebooks and guides and resources that are hosted on our website that Kneat publishes and hosts out regularly. So there's a QR code here to scan to download. You can also find it on our website. And again, you'll be getting these slides in a PDF format, so you can get that link again then. Talking about Kneat webinars, at the end of the month, we have our monthly Kneat GX platform demo. So if you want to hear more about Kneat and see it live in action, our platform demo, register for that demo on January 31st. You can find information about that, again, on our website under webinars and on our social media. And then in February, just posted today, a session from an expert take on mastering your validation plans. So getting ready for 2024 by going through your master validation checklist and your master validation plan. So definitely tune in for that one. Like I said, it was just opened up and announced today. So get in and register. There should be posts on our LinkedIn advertising that one, and an email went out if you're on our email newsletter. So that is all I have for today. We're so happy to have you here with us. So happy to hear from you, Darren, as well. So let's all connect on social media. LinkedIn and X, we are out there. Our handles are there on the page. Reach out and connect with us on social. We'll have lots of great content. We always want to hear from you. And if you'd like to receive further information about Kneat GX, please just follow the link in the chat to request a personal callback or a personal demo. Let me get that link in the chat. Perfect. We are a little bit over time, so I thank you all for your attention and for staying with us. But we look forward to seeing you on our next Kneat Insights webinar. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Darren, once again, and have a great day.
Bye now. Take care.